Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in Senior A English. We are now in Unit 2 of the MyPerspectives textbook. We are on page 116. I just want to back up for a few moments though and look at Unit 2 on page 112. The topic is reflecting on society, argument, satire, and reform. There are some unit goals I want you to pay attention to on page 114, and then there's as well some academic vocabulary on page 115, annotation, theoretical, prescribed, conviction, and tenacious. I want you to know those words. Let's turn though to the reading on page 116 that we'll be annotating now. Standing up to absolute power. The launch text is explanatory model. This selection is an example of an explanatory text. You're going to be writing one of these essays at the conclusion of Unit 2. What is explanatory? A type of writing in which an author presents a thesis and organizes facts and examples to support it. You'll write in this mode for the performance-based assessment at the end of this unit. As you read, consider why the writer has chosen the example of the English barons to illustrate the thesis. Mark the facts and examples that explain the events described. Let's go ahead now and read and annotate as we go. Rebellions are not always led by the downtrodden. Sometimes even those with the most to lose have felt the need to challenge accepted social practice. One early example of this occurred in 1215. Obviously, you see your date, you're going to circle it. In England, when a group of wealthy barons rose up against their king. The reasons for the rebellion were many and varied. The results of their rebellion changed the course of history. So we've got a rebellion of 1215. Notice that it's going to be a group of wealthy barons. So it's not going to be people who are downtrodden, but rather a group of wealthy barons. The feudal system. Notice the use of headings in this model, right? Paragraph 2. The European feudal system gave the king total control over land rights. He owned the land and leased it to barons. In return for the king's generosity, the barons paid rent or taxes, promised complete loyalty, and provided the king with knights for his army. When they were not busy fighting for the king, the knights leased land from the barons, thus adding to the barons' power and pocketbooks. At the base of the feudal pyramid were the serfs, the villeins, or the peasants. This system required a king with unquestionable authority. Such a king would have the respect of the barons, who would live happily and wealthily, and of the knights, who could be called into battle only during occasional crises. The system may not have benefited the serfs very much, but they had no power or resources to challenge it. King John's quest. England's King John was not a king with unquestionable authority. He had to compete for the throne with his brother when his brother Richard died, and his revenge against his rival supporters made the barons unhappy. John also inherited Richard's debts, accrued during the long and terrible Crusades. To raise money to run the country, John continued Richard's practice of heavily taxing the barons. Shortly after becoming king in 1199, John went to war against France. In rapid succession, he lost lands in Normandy and other parts of what is now the north coast of France. These losses made him appear weak, and they cost the lives of many of the barons' knights. In 1213, there you are, important date. In 1213, King John decided to win back those lost lands. He knew he would need an influx of men and money from England's barons. He demanded knights and gold, but many barons, disgusted with John's self-defeating foreign policy, resisted. John avenged himself by arresting some barons and attacking others in their manors. He went to war as planned, but once again, he lost. Our final heading, rebellion at last. The barons refused to provide yet more money or men to their now weakened monarch. Instead, they began to make their own demands, which King John rejected. The barons formed their own army, and civil war in England seemed imminent. The archbishop sought to negotiate a short-term peace. In June of 1215, King John agreed to the Articles of the Barons, which would soon become known as Magna Carta, or the Great Charter. The document did not overthrow the king. That was too grand a gesture for the barons, who still enjoyed the benefits of feudal life. Instead, the Magna Carta limited the king's authority, ensuring that he too would be subject to law. The idea that a ruler retains power only through the consent of the governed was genuinely groundbreaking. It would later find its way into the written products of American and French revolutionaries. We think, of course, of the notion of Jeffersonian democracy in the Declaration of Independence. Many of those later rebels, like the barons of 1215, had much to lose, but chose to challenge the status quo anyway. Notice that you've got some vocabulary work at the bottom of 117 I want you to play around with. Write your summary on 118. And then I'm interested in you responding on page 119 to this prompt. What factors lead people to criticize their society rather than simply accept it? Go ahead and go to work with that. We'll come back to have some conversation about that. Thank you.